You're listening to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting. First, before we get started, we want to remind you to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/rangemindedpodcast. And also, you can now check us out on Instagram. Just search for us there at Range Minded Podcast. Also, one more thing, and this is a big deal. If you're in the Boise area next weekend, that's March 16th, 2019, we want to invite you to join us at the Independence Indoor Shooting Expo at the range, where you can meet a bunch of vendors from all over the gun world, and you could meet us as we do a live podcast. Get more info on that at iishooting.com or check us out on our Facebook page. This is episode 49, where we talk with author Andrew Coussens, whose book, called A Failed State, is out right now. It's a fantastic military fiction book rooted in reality, where Andrew draws from his experiences as a contractor all across the world. We chat about the book, the sequel that's coming out soon as well, his involvement with the Activity Group, which is a phenomenal local first aid and trauma product company, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So this is an episode that you do not want to miss. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy episode 49 of Range Minded, the Andrew Coussens interview, and A Failed State. Hello, and welcome to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting, episode number 49. My name is Mark Long, and I am joined by
Steve Zimmerman.
There we go.
It's my turn. Jeez.
Yeah, thanks. Johnny on the spot there. We are joined by a very special guest, Andrew Coussens. Say hello, Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Andrew is, you do a lot of different things, actually.
Yeah, jack of all trades.
Yeah.
I can't deploy anymore, so trying to stay on that cutting edge if that's even possible.
Yeah. So you are an author, a speaker, a consultant for the Activity Group.
Yep.
Awesome.
I'm probably missing a couple things.
Well, dad,
yeah,
all that good stuff.
Yeah, you've got a couple kids.
Yeah, I got 3 kids. Single dad, 3 kids. That's always, it's enough to make anybody go crazy. So
yeah, you're in good company. Steve got 4, right, Steve?
Man. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, I don't have any kids yet, but I figured 2 is probably my max. I only got 2 arms.
There you go. I tell people 2 things. I tell them my 2 favorite things in the whole world are being with my kids and being without my kids. So, yeah.
Like a dad.
So you're totally a Renaissance man. But tell us a little about your background as well.
Well, I tell you, it's interesting because the job that I fell into as a contractor for this organization, and it's probably no mystery that we're talking about OGA, 3-letter agency, is the statement of work was far beyond what I thought at the time what my skill set was, and I had I'd done some federal law enforcement stuff. But a lot of the guys that I deployed with at the time in 2008 were guys that had come from like Dink Marchenko's unit, Red Cell. We had a guy from CAG, from Delta.
Wow.
We had, a ton of SEALs. I mean, at the time it was the company that sponsored, or not sponsored, but the company that provided the manpower to the project was Blackwater, and it was a special projects division of Blackwater, and it kind of got some bad press at the time. But so I can't say a lot about it, but I can tell you that we kind of did the intel collection for all the door kickers. So we were kind of co-located at times with a lot of those guys, which suited most of them just fine because they knew a lot of them had kind of come across from those units. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I did some security for a relatively unknown organization called the NSSE, which is the National Special Event or Special Security Events, which is a task force that's put together post 9/11 by all the big DOJ agencies and some military that kind of keep like foreign dignitaries or Olympics safe from terrorism. Yeah. So right place, right time, and kind of just fell into it. 2008. So 7 years of that.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it was, and definitely motivation for the book.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got a book. This was just released within the last 2 years.
No, October actually.
Oh, this past October.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really, really recent. Yeah. We should say it's called A Failed State, and it's a fiction novel.
Yeah, interesting story there too. If you guys want to hear it, so
please.
And it's partially a sad story, but so I spent 8 months out every year deploying for 7 years, which didn't make me a great husband or father. I mean, I did my best with what I had, like a lot of guys do, but my wife battled depression and alcoholism. So in 2016, she dealing with those circumstances, she took her life. And after that, I was set to go on my 22nd deployment in 7 years. So, one after the other. And my life changed overnight. So in the midst of obviously in grief and stuff you're dealing with, I wrote an autobiography to kind of process it with no intention to publish it. It's written in the author's note in the back a little bit, but I thought I'd recap. And my organization flat out redacted just about everything. And it was generally written. It wasn't written specifically, but I had to talk about some of the background and where I was when she was dealing with some issues.
Sure. Yeah, there was just enough information for them to not feel comfortable with it, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Steve knows what I'm talking about. So it was unreadable. And I was never going to publish it, but when I did, I figured I could help somebody else doing it. And then a friend of mine who is a Navy vet and owns an organization called Operation Military Family out of Seattle, he's like, just publish fiction. He goes, I've seen it done before and it seems to work. So I pushed it through my publications review board, and they sent it back pretty quick with an A-OK. A couple of issues they had, but omitted those, and I published it as fiction. And and sorry to be so long-winded, guys, but what it allowed me to do was have a lot more creative autonomy. So the main character, Damian Collins, in the book is actually an amalgamation of myself and two other guys. Okay, but it's probably no secret that almost everybody in that unit had marital difficulties because of the
time you spent away.
Yeah, correct. The operational tempo. So it gave me a little bit more of a latitude to tell a broader story and still kind of walk that edge of truth fiction. Sure.
And I wanted to ask you, was it easier for you to write an autobiography, or do you think it was easier to write fiction?
Well, I'll tell you this. The autobiography was 90,000 plus words.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably over 6-7 months. Okay. And it was unedited. I edited it myself, which you can consider unedited, right? But this was only 38,000. Okay. So I think, all I did is laterally move some stuff across. Okay. Gotcha. And so I was able to read the book cover to cover. And so actually, I wanted to tell you, I actually read it in 2 sittings. I'm like the slowest reader ever. Really? But I picked it up last Friday because Jessica, like I said, lent me her copy. Yeah. Read about 30, 40 pages that night. And then last Monday, finished off the last other 170, because I think it's a great, knowing that there is some realism based in it, and the way that you write, you're kind of just dropped into this situation. Yeah. I mean, there is some military jargon in there that you get to figure out, and but it really adds to the realism, and I think the immersion of it, right. And the way you describe things, it's like you're really there in Afghanistan, I feel like. And well, thanks.
The other thing was that I think a lot of military kind of fiction doesn't focus on is the emotional part of it. That was something that stuck out to me, where a lot of it's all action and exposition, like Tom Clancy, for example. Exactly. I was a big Tom Clancy fan. It's either action or it's exposition. But you can really tell when there's some downtime for these characters, that their mind starts to go, and Damien, the main character, it just starts to think of back home and all of his dealings back at home. And I think that's something that's unique. Was that kind of difficult to kind of weave into that, or was it pretty natural?
It felt pretty natural. Just thinking back a little bit, everybody was struggling with something. I deployed with guys that were they're in their mid to late 30s on their fourth marriages.
Wow.
And, guys that were paying, alimony to 3 different wives and weren't making a lot at the end of the day. But, and then, Steve could probably, sympathize. Your head goes to your children a lot. You want to provide a good life for your children, but at the same time, you're serving your country. It tears at you, I think that, like I say in the book or in the author's note, and certainly in this next book, which I'll talk about when I get a chance, is when you're downrange, you're thinking about home, and when you're home, you're thinking about downrange. It's like this ridiculous conundrum. It's like this cosmic joke.
Yeah. Well, and so part of the book, I won't reveal any spoilers or anything like that, but there is some dramatic scene changes, basically some location changes. Yeah. The character does go around the world pretty quick. Is that pretty true to how deployments work? You go from the U.S. to all the way halfway across the world and halfway across the world back again?
Yeah. The hardest part for me was being stateside within 26 hours of being on the battlefield. And that really messes with your head. And I envy, and I didn't at first, but I envy my friends that are a couple of soldiers out of infantry guys out of Lewis McChord, that, they'll take their time. They'll go to Kuwait or Oman or something. And then, no, it's not right. Oman. And then they'll go back to their garrison at Lewis. Yeah. And then they'll spend time there before they get punched out for home. And I never got that luxury. So I'm standing like in the movie Hurt Locker. I mean, no kidding. Yeah. I'm standing in the cereal aisle like that next day, picking cereal out for my kids because we had to go make a run. We were short on stuff. And I almost had a complete breakdown because there's 1,000 boxes of cereal, whereas we ate the same thing. And if we were eating Indage food, we were just eating rice and goat meat. Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be that. And that point stuck with me in the book that there's no transitional time. You're basically from one side to the other. So when you say when you're home, you're thinking about over there, and when you're over there, you're thinking about back home. That totally makes sense. So and we talked. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say something. I'm just curious, and you're welcome to answer this or not, but did you notice that, or did you feel that as you were developing these characters and writing more in the book, that it was bringing up things that either you had set aside and tried not to think about, and I don't want to say demons out of the closet, but you know what I mean? Like, did you find more out about yourself as you were developing these characters? I guess that's a better way to put it.
Well, I think everybody does. I think the best way to process something is to see your life either on paper or to hear it back over, narration. But I mean, I'll tell you that I didn't realize the depth of all these guys' problems. We laughed about it, of course, downrange, and you make fun of guys to their faces, and you defend them voraciously behind their back, their back. So that's the way it's always works. With these units, but I look at it now and I think, man, guys are just. I remember one guy told me, he goes, "Yeah, my kid's college fund is paid for. It's my greatest achievement." And his call sign was Blade, and I said, "Man, you haven't been home in like 11 months." Wow. Because he'd just do these back-to-back deployments because you could at the time. They needed guys boots on ground, and I just thought that there's got to be a bigger penalty for that than if you could physically pay for their college fund,
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. And to go back to that, the back home and the emotional stuff, because another impression that I got is there's, usually 5 seconds or 5% of action, and the other 95% is either reconnaissance or planning or watching other people carry out things, on video or hearing about it. So that you have a lot of downtime. Oh yeah. And so that in that downtime, you think about, back home or any problems you have or anything like that. But that's something that I don't think you see a lot in movies. You don't read a lot in books or action books or anything like that. Why do you think that is, that, that people don't write about that, whereas you just chose to do that?
Me personally, I think the reason is that they don't want to show, people what, for lack of a better word, what a shit show. You know what I mean? It is. I mean, it's just such personal tragedy.
Sure.
Kids just wishing that their dad would be home for their birthday or for their ball game, and wives wishing that they'd make it home for one Christmas out of, half a dozen. I think that there's some movies coming out now, and I met Max. I got the benefit to meet Max. It's called Sergeant Will Garner, that exclusively talks about. Yeah, there's a beginning portion of action, and then exclusively talks about PTSD, about TBI. Some of the issues would encompass anxiety. The biggest one that I didn't even realize, and I got diagnosed with when I got back, was hormone deficiencies.
Really?
And that's because you've got these guys that are, and like you said, 5% or 10% sheer terror and 90% boredom, right?
Yeah.
You got these guys that their adrenal glands are just firing and then wide open, and then they're not, and then they're firing wide open.
Shut them down, and yeah.
So you get this adrenal fatigue, which messes with your hormones. And I came back, and they're like, "Wow, your thyroid is not working properly. Your pituitary is not working properly." And
wow.
You're the best one, which threw me, is your testosterone levels are like a 90-year-old man. So because you burn them out.
Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a new one. But like I said, the myriad of health issues.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what guys contend with. I don't think that's a pretty picture to paint. I don't think anybody wants to see that. Civilians especially, they don't want to have to go, oh man, this is what we're doing to these guys. And
that's a tough thing to think about, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, very much so.
But and to go back to the writing a little bit, I think you really wrote in a really relatable way. I've never served in the military, but the way you wrote, you can really feel what these guys are going through, and you can really picture it in your head. And it's tough.
It is.
I can't even imagine. So, but to go back to the book, you do leave us on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned that there is a sequel. And I mean, you really like cliffhanger, man. I was I was getting through the book, and I'm like, okay, I only got like 4 or 5 pages left. I'm like, how's he going to wrap all this up? Nope.
Well, I'll tell you what, I did leave you a little nugget. The first chapter of Relapse is in the back of the book. So you do get a little bit of an insight into what happens there. But and I wanted to go back to something you said earlier.
Sure.
And you talked about a lot of the military jargon. So the feedback I got, especially from the civilian side, was especially the female, because I don't know if you knew this, but 75% of my readership through the analytics that I got back were female.
Really?
Yeah. And it surprised me quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
But they had a hard time with that as well. Mm-hmm. And so the second book does pick up where the first one left off pretty well. But I leave a lot of that out. There's a couple of chapters where I'll have to obviously talk about some things in military terms because it's appropriate to that storyline.
Right. It calls for it. Sure.
Yeah. But it's more. Is it too early to talk about Relapse?
No, go ahead. Yeah. So tell us everything you can about the second book, because one of my questions was did you just write it right after, or was there a little bit of a break in between?
I took a little bit of a break. The promotions initially were the difficult part for me. The writing is the easy part. I cranked this out in a season, so 3 months.
Okay.
Obviously on the heels of the failed autobiography, or the rejected autobiography, but. And then I had to go in the full-on promotions, and that was a shock. I'm not that guy.
Sure.
And when I heard, you got to be a brand. The author's got to be a brand. I was like, no,
that's not what I want to do. Yeah.
I spent half my life, or most of my career, not trying to stay, out of the limelight and in the shadows. And the last thing you want to do is step into it and try to pat yourself on the back. Most guys aren't good at that anyway. So.
Yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the second book. What was it called again? I'm sorry.
It's called Relapse.
Relapse.
And,
okay.
Obviously a reason for that. I heard my kids listen to a lot of rap.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, actually, I started to now myself, but they they're preteens and teens.
Sure.
So of course that's what we listen to, and we listened to an artist, and he was singing about that in civilian terms, like in relapse, in a non alcoholic or drug induced relapse. And I was like, wow, that's perfect, because what I wanted to address, I didn't get to address in A Failed State, was a lot of what these guys deal with and how they talk about it amongst themselves and the concerns they have. The issue that a lot of guys had that I tried to portray in this book, and I'll definitely portray in Relapse, is they want to get out, but they don't know how, or they don't want to because they've been training their whole lives for this type of mission. And now they're making money in a contractor basis that's commensurate with their skill set. Mm-hmm. So they're over there going, man, I'm doing financially well for a change. My kid, like I said, the college fund, right? Kids are taken care of.
Sure.
House is being paid for. We got some toys.
Yeah. Everything's great.
Yeah. Taking
financially.
Vacations. Yeah. Right. Well, there you go. They're stuck, and I wanted to discuss that. And what's cool about Relapse is I can discuss that while they're doing other stuff. It's not like they're just standing in a street corner,
right,
talking back and forth. I mean, they're doing stuff. They're, I'll kind of lead you a little bit into the storyline, but they're in new countries now, doing operations, or they're doing training or workups, and they're talking about it back and forth. So
sure.
I'll let the dialogue kind of do that.
Yeah. And let's go back a little bit to the feedback about the first book. Like I said, it's a great story. I think you address a lot of, interesting and fascinating topics, in there that you can really emotionally connect with. But what is the feedback you've gotten maybe, from, military and contractor folks versus civilian folks, or both?
The female side of it appreciated the male character because he is flawed, unsure of himself when it comes to fatherhood, to being a husband, to being a good husband. As you all know, he's not doing so great at it, or he's unsure of what route to take to be good at it.
Yeah. And what surprised me about that was you hit that on like the first couple of pages, and you just dive right into it. And I thought that was really cool.
Thank you. And what was I'm sorry.
Just the feedback you've gotten from both civilian and then from military and contractor.
So the females
folks.
love that. They bogged down a little bit when it got into the operational side, which is the Tom Clancy-esque side that we talk about, which is what I thought males would like and where I thought the direction of the book would go. So that was very positive. I got a lot of good feedback. So I went to SHOT Show shortly after the release of the book in January. So the book came out mid-October. Did a little bit of promotions, did a few podcasts regionally, locally. And then right before SHOT Show, a good friend of mine named Mike Baker, who owns Diligence LLC and was a former CIA operations officer, covert operations officer, happened to mention it on the Joe Rogan show. Okay. So...
Because Mike Baker, I believe, is an Idahoan, right?
Yeah.
Because I listened to that podcast because I thought that was an interesting subject. And then he's talking about going to Boise State Bronco games and seeing Joe Rogan and stand up. And I go, wait a minute, that guy must live in Boise somewhere, or at least, somewhere in an undisclosed location in Idaho. So that was cool.
Now, I never worked with Mike. A lot of guys like him, but he's a good egg. And Mike Baker just dropped a 30-second plug, and I watched it. It didn't breach it, but I watched it bump up against Amazon bestseller status for like 2 weeks.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? I mean, the podcast reached 1.6 million viewers, and I was getting 0.01% of those in sales, which I mean, that's, most people would think that's a horrible conversion rate, but I was like, well, I'll take it.
Yeah, seriously.
So that was a good one. And then SHOT Show, a bunch of guys that I know that I never even served downrange with, including guys that own pretty big companies like Fusion Tactical or Goliath Tactical, which I'm wearing the shirt right now. They were like, man, it's a good book, and they'll put it through their social media channels and give it shout outs and stuff like that. So so really good, yeah.
And so the contractor and military type folks, they had some high praise for it as well. Did they say anything different or anything that stuck out with you about that? Maybe about the authenticity of it or the realism of it or anything like that?
I think that's what they liked was the authenticity, but it didn't take the angle, and you guys will appreciate this, Mark and Steve. I mean, it didn't take the same angle that a lot of the special operations guys took and wrote like a story about themselves or their own operations and then got PNG'd for it, persona non grata and stuff. No Easy Day was one of them that, even Mike Baker mentioned that he said it was done wrong because it put out a lot of the TTP, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. I think I got that wrong. Techniques, tactics, and procedures. I don't know. One of the two. It's been a while for me. So if that makes sense, that they liked how this was done because it was able to kind of allude to things without actually going into, because as you know, in the book, a lot of these guys are watching the feed from a drone. And not in a couple of scenes and not actually boots on ground. Now it talks about some tactics, but it doesn't talk about anything that's not in, popular culture already. And it was vetted by my organization for legitimacy. So
was that tough to do, to kind of wrestle with what to include and what not to, or was it pretty natural kind of being in that world for so long?
I jammed it all in, and because I was going to let the Publications Review Board take care of
let
that.
Let them do the hard work,
Because I'm like, screw it, I mean, they redacted so much. Let them figure it out. And ironically, they only had issues with some of the titles. I had to change some of the titles. So one of the titles that got changed in this book is the organization called Cerebus, which did a lot of the door kicking.
Yeah.
They're not called that. I know what they're called, but they had a problem with it. So I changed the name, and here we go. So
cool, man. Yeah. So Steve, did you have anything?
No, man, I'm actually just enjoying this conversation is what's happening.
So let's switch gears a little bit. You talked about, and maybe these two aren't related, and if not, that's totally cool. But you talked about how, these guys in these positions can kind of get stuck in a loop and they want to get out, but they can't.
Right.
And you're also you're a motivational speaker, I would say, or a guest speaker, I guess. You kind of clarify the title for me.
Yeah. I guess, coach, speaker. I haven't done a lot of it yet. My third book, now that Relapse is done, is actually going to be a departure, and it's going to be a book on grief because I was in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I realized a lot of guys don't deal well with that subject because they keep their feelings internalized, and they'd rather pick something up and read it or do a one-on-one than actually seek out counsel or advice or what have you.
Us manly men, we feel like it's a sign of weakness if we have to seek out help. So
there you go.
I can totally get it if they're jumping into a book and that associates their feelings. I totally get. I'm that guy too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can do it in the privacy of your own home or whatever.
Look at through the lens of somebody else's experience rather than have to be scrutinized for your own.
Right.
Yeah. But what I was going to ask, if that's all related, like what do you see, or what advice can you give to people who want to get out of that, and what kind of is their way out that you've experienced or that you've seen?
Well, they can use me as an example. Here's the thing about advice, because we all know it's overrated, right? Is I will give advice to anybody that asks for it. I'm not going to ever impose upon them for it. I'm not going to say this is what you need to do.
Sure. Unless
somebody's made it clear that they want me to say something, I don't feel the right to do that. And the reason I say that is because a lot of these guys, and there's quite a few that are still over there, are so happy doing it. And their wives, their wife, whoever that might be, second, third, whatever, first, hopefully it's the first, has dealt with it already while they were in the military, right? They've already dealt with year-long deployments, cycles, what have you, TDYs. But I just let them do their thing, and when they come to me, and some have, I tell them, I said, man, I got out because I'd still be doing it right now. I gotta be honest with you. And I just got the chance, which I thought I'd mention at the show, to go back over to Iraq this time with an organization called, Global Surgical Medical Group. And it's an organization that does, that trains Peshmerga in trauma medical, because a lot of these guys are getting shot, still mopping up ISIS over there. Yeah. And they also go into some of the towns that do surgical procedures on a lot of these children and men and women that were left injured in the wake of ISIS.
Heavy.
So they'll physically do that. It's cool. And you can look them up on Instagram. It's a cool organization. A lot of the guys were former operators, most of them were 18 Deltas and Ranger medics, and just an outstanding group of guys that still want to have a toehold in that lifestyle. And that's where I'm coming from too, is give me a little bit of that to keep me, pacified. Cause sometimes I just go crazy with the civilian side and how sensitive people are, in this side of the world. Right.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, cause they talk about that on Mike Baker talks about that with Joe Rogan as well.
Yep.
And, it's got to be tough to make that transition, especially when you're gone for such a long time, and you're kind of out of the cycle of things, and then you come back, and the whole world's changed. I mean, the whole country's changed. 8 months later, or whatever, and you're probably like, what happened?
You're right.
That's got to be tough to be out of the loop like that. So, but to be able to kind of keep, like you said, keep your toes in the water, but to be able to help people, that's got to be pretty fulfilling.
Yeah. And a much shorter deployment too. I mean, we're talking 2 weeks versus, 3 to 6 month.
Oh, wow.
cycle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and to talk about medical too, you are a consultant with the Activity Group, which is focused on medical and trauma kits and gear to save people's lives.
Indeed.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and what your involvement with that is?
Yeah, good time to talk about it actually, because I was the lead in procuring a contract with the Gowan Air Base.
Yeah, awesome.
First CST, which is their civil support team. Now, nobody on the civilian side, and I'm not talking about you guys, but in general, knows what a CST does. But they're the guys that, if you ever see the movies where there's a nuclear, chemical, or biological spill, they're the guys in the big Tyvek suits with the rebreathers, that come in and deal with all that. So that's that side. And then, of course, the first HERF, which stands for Homeland Response Force out of Seattle. And it's a big mass casualty drill of that variety. Yes, there's been a chemical spill affecting a large amount of people, and it's obviously going to be done on military training grounds, but we're providing some of the consulting and, of course, the role players, injured role players, as well as the moulage. So we're dressing all these people up to look like zombies or dead people, injured people that are suffering from whatever affliction the military deems as the one they want to contend with. And so we've made a move from kits and some localized training, which we've always done. The SWAT teams, attack med teams here, with tourniquets and bandages, what have you, to doing a larger role to kind of help the military train and stay on that cutting edge of readiness.
Cool. And we at the store, we have a pretty dang good relationship with the Activity Group. In fact, Activity Group made all of our med kits for our ranges, and we've dealt with them from the inception of the store, and we really appreciate what you guys do as far as that side of the world is concerned. It's I love your products. We can't endorse them highly enough.
Well, we appreciate you guys because, the more awareness that's out there, firearm safety, right? And, and how to treat, an accidental or negligent discharge, of course, God forbid that, that hit anybody is key. And we want to push that narrative as much as gun safety far and above, but in case there is something that happens or somebody's not trained.
Well, if you're in the business of making holes, then you should understand how to plug them back up. And
right. Yeah.
It's I don't know. I geek out about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We did an episode, probably 10 or 15, 20 episodes even ago about individual first aid kits and just what, what's good to have, what's good to carry. And that you get trained on that is important, especially if you're kind of in the gun world at all.
Well, and the wonderful thing about that is it's not just about at the range or hunting or whatever. You don't know when you're going to need that IFAC. You could be driving down the road, taking your kids to school and come across a car accident or something. It's something everybody needs to learn how to do, I think.
Well, I always geek out on, like you do, I geek out on that stuff too. I love it. And one of the one of the esteemed organizations that we trained and provided a kit for was Meridian Police Department.
Okay.
Great organization, probably one of the best, police departments that I've ever seen function, especially with such a growing community.
Yeah.
But we provided them with a product called Wound Clot that sounds a lot like the rest of the products that are out there, but Wound Clot is it's actually unlike all the others in the sense that it's just a piece of cellulose, almost like a screen door, right?
Okay.
But as the blood flows through this piece of gauze, this piece of cellulose, it makes its way down to the source of bleeding, of hemorrhaging.
Wow.
And then it starts to have, it has functional molecular groups that cause more platelet activity to the region and then physically becomes part of the clot. So where I'm getting at with this, not to bore everybody, is that they had a girl, and I can't remember which bridge it was, and I talked to several officers about it, and my good friend, Lieutenant Sean Harper, is over there as well. He referred to this incident as well, where a girl slit both her wrists in a suicide attempt and then jumped off the bridge. Well, when they got to the scene way ahead of paramedics and applied this product to her wrists, and by the time the paramedics showed up, because we're talking 90-second clotting, without any after effects, meaning the wound doesn't need to be flushed or irrigated like some of the other products do.
Sure.
Others good products still. Yeah. But she was already... besides whatever damage she did to her leg, she was ambulatory. She wasn't circling that drain. So,
well, and it's not.
I love
it sounds like it's not like other clotting agents that cause secondary, damages,
Correct.
And that's pretty awesome.
Correct. Yeah, you could put Quick Clot in your mouth, but you'd have to drive yourself, just to goof around. But you'd have to drive yourself to the ER right afterwards. and the good thing about Wound Clot is you can actually put it in any the thoracic cavity or any part of the body, and there's no downside because it's not chemically impregnated. So for hunters, like you were saying, Steve, for hunters or for people that just want to be out there and have a product, I mean, it's one of the best things I can recommend having.
Well, great. Now I have to buy some more stuff.
Well, and I imagine too that, if you just put it on there and it does its thing, obviously it's good to get some training, but it's easier for people to use. It's almost kind of like a defibrillator where it tells you what to do.
Exactly.
And if it's easy for anybody to do, then especially because, and I think we've talked about it before, but when you're in a stressful situation or an emergency situation, some people might just freeze or not know what to do. Yeah. And if you can make it easier for somebody to do something, to take steps to save a life, that's going to go, miles farther than anything else.
Yeah. And then the big kicker on this product was it doesn't require positive pressure. So if you were to introduce gauze to a gunshot wound in a, upper or lower appendage, you need to put positive pressure on that to keep it in there until it starts to clot. And this thing you don't, because like I said, it sinks into that wound, acting as a screen until it has those molecular activity.
That's pretty dang cool.
So it's cool. And so there's one step less, right? Of stuff you got to do. So but we love, providing stuff for the area. I know often a company's hardest thing to do is to provide product within its own backyard.
Sure.
And we have that problem with a couple of law enforcement, the biggest law enforcement agency here, unfortunately, in the Valley.
Shall remain nameless.
Yeah. And they're a great bunch of guys and they do a great job, but it's just hard, they're skeptical, and it's easier for us to go up to the Secret Service or something.
And then sometimes they're a victim of their own training too. They don't want to look outside of the box that they've been in over the last 10 years. So it's tough sometimes.
Well, and what's funny too is that the Treasure Valley in this area, even though just the whole state of Idaho, is home to some mega companies, with regards to firearms, medical, training, any kind of thing like that. But you would never know it. It's not like, the police officers are all carrying stuff, accessorized by Odin Works, or, they're not necessarily using Gemtech suppressors if they were still here, but that was like when I first moved here a few years ago, I was like, wow, like this is like, what we called it, Steve, a firearms mecca
is what it is.
Yeah. And so it's cool that, that we have, the activity group here, some, the medical side of things, which is, I think, often overlooked.
Yeah. I think that, like you said, a lot of these guys it's hard to look outside the box. There's something that's happening right now in the Valley that's happening in larger cities and population centers called Rescue Task Force. It's a pretty exciting new development, and it is literally about getting anybody together in a active shooter scenario. And I'm talking putting groups of first arriving on scene firefighters, medics, non-TAC medics, because they will usually show up first. It's the regular ambulance variety, and then regular patrol officers, and going in to a building, and the police officers will create that warm zone as they clear it, and then the firefighters and the medics will actually be able to affect change and start treating people. So that's brand new to Idaho.
That's awesome.
And I'm excited to see they implement it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
That's smart. I mean, just anywhere to do that. That's pretty smart.
Well, they do it in big cities where they're a little bit more progressive. I know Phoenix and Las Vegas, because the Las Vegas shootings are really big on that.
Yeah.
I got a chance to visit on behalf of the activity group and go down and show them some product during the 2 concerts they had almost a few days a year later since the anniversary of the shooting that they had there a year and a half ago. And I got to talk to them about the changes they've made. Rescue Task Force is one of them. Having all officers and all hospitals on standby during large events. So if there ever is anything like that, they can bring all the good things to bear on what would be a very worst case scenario.
Right.
Yeah, and save a lot of lives a lot faster. So, Steve, you got anything?
No. Like I say, I just enjoy this right now. It's a good conversation.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered a little bit of everything. You did bring some holsters in. Is that another endeavor you're involved with?
Well, Filster is a holster company that we partnered with, and it's modular.
Okay.
And they make an amazing product. And I have a hard time doing that because Goliath Tactical is a buddy of mine, and he makes an amazing product too.
Sure.
But this has just got more of a modular capability. So if you wanted to wear a concealed carry and you wanted to be able to kind of change modular pieces to it, carry a tack light or an extra mag, or maybe even a utility pouch.
Okay.
In a concealed fashion, you can do that. So there's cool stuff. You should check it out. I'll be at hopefully be at the show on the 16th here.
Oh, the expo. Yeah, that's coming up.
Yeah, with not only books, but with holsters and pew kits and what have you. So. Yeah,
we're going to, it's not 100% yet, but there's a chance we may do a live podcast at the expo. Cool. So you'd be more than welcome to sit down with us and talk with us again. And the thing about holsters, I mean, we've done a holster or 2 episode. We've got a couple friends of the podcast who have their own holster lines and stuff. What's interesting to me about the holster industry is that there are so many different holster manufacturers and designs and all, because it's such a personal choice. Yeah. What works for one person, and you could have 2 people that are the same build, same height, same everything. What could work for one person isn't going to work for the next person next to them. So there's tons of room for that kind of stuff. Or maybe people who, for example, like at my job, I can't carry. On the workplace. Sure. So if I'm going to carry while I'm in the car or on the way to work and back, I have to find something that's going to work, So, but maybe somebody can carry all day, or they can open carry, or they work outside or something like that. So there's just so many different scenarios and circumstances where I think that the holster industry lends itself to that kind of variety. So. Let's talk about the book a little bit more. Where can we pick up the book if we're interested?
So signed copies are available on afailedstate.com. All one word, afailedstate.com. And it is available in the ebook form for tablet or Kindle on Sony, iTunes, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Cool. And the next book, Relapse, is set to launch don't quote me on this, it's set to launch in May. And then I'll have some specials with, if you buy a failed state, you can get it for half price if you buy the new book, something like that, for people that don't have both. But so I'm excited for that. But a failed state is supposed to be available on Audible soon, but I haven't really chosen a narrator for it
Okay.
Yeah, you got to choose the right one.
Yeah.
You should just be doing it, man. You got the voice.
Well, that's true.
I was going to say, yeah, you could do it yourself.
Yeah, there's a couple options, and I'm going to definitely explore them because a lot of people say, well, I drive my car to work and I want to be able to listen rather than I don't have no time to read a book. And trust me, I get that. But yeah, so that's where it's available right now. And of course it'll be for sale at a discounted rate, believe it or not, at the expo.
Awesome.
On the 16th too. So
very cool.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah. And when we talked about the title of Relapse, how did you come up with the title of A Failed State?
So I thought a lot about, like what we talked about the marriage aspect and the marital difficulties and the relational challenges, as well as the fact that at the time I was boots on ground, ISIS was a component in Afghanistan, as well as Al Qaeda and the Taliban.
Wow.
So I was thinking, man, is this place ever going to be able to draw out of this place? And, I had been deployed everywhere in that country as we, did our jobs. And it just seemed like it was just kind of circling the drain, so to speak. And so that just seemed like a really good...
It's kind of an apt title.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, A Failed State, you can pick it up. It's a phenomenal book. You can really, if you really dedicate yourself to it, you can do it in a weekend. Like I said, I did it in 2 sittings because I couldn't put it down. It was a good balance between action and reflection. And like I said before, I think you really hit an aspect that a lot of people don't think about. And I think it might... in movies, it's harder, I think, to get into the minds of characters sometimes, but you really have this character, Damian Collin, just open. You're really inside of his mind and going between anxiety and the PTSD. I think you touch on a little bit in there as well. And you really get into his thoughts. It really, brings it to the forefront and makes it crystal clear for, like a civilian like me. So
I appreciate that.
So it's a great book. Pick it up, read it. It's a great book. Keep your eyes out for Relapse, hopefully in May. Anything else to add, Steve?
I do have one question, and maybe this will get a little too deep, maybe not. A lot of guys, this stuff's just been on my mind a lot lately with a lot of different people in my life. What would you consider to be a hero? Who is your hero?
Wow, that's
a deep one, Steve.
I told you.
I think the easiest place for me to go with that is the women that maintain the home in the rear while all these guys are, cycling through these deployments. They do so much. I mean, I remember coming home and I remember yelling about the yard not being raked, but not realizing that my wife is, working, taking care of 3 kids, taking care of the home, the finances, the broken water heaters, the TV on the fritz, all that stuff. And I got to be honest. I mean, the women that really hold it down, that's, that's where my head and my heart go with that, because it's a huge job, and I'm doing it now alone. And trust me, I see, and it's not intuitive for a guy, as we all know. So I see the value in it. So
awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
And to kind of piggyback off Steve's question, obviously you're becoming a resource for, contractors and veterans and things like that, with regards to PTSD and anxiety and kind of rotating back into the world. Are there any organizations that you work with or that you know of that are able to support, families at home in that regard? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of organizations just in the Treasure Valley talk about, firearm manufacturers and stuff here. There's quite a few good organizations here that might not support the veterans directly. There's Waiken Warrior. I'm writing some stories on some veterans that have made some amazing transitions from soldier to business. And of course, they kind of bring themselves up and their family comes along for the ride. Mission 43, a friend of mine, Brian Madden, runs that organization for the Catherine Albertsons Foundation. That's a good one. Yeah. Another friend of mine, Conrad Jeffries, has started a think tank
and this is an amazing organization called Shot at Dawn Project, that they want to have a facility out in Caldwell or in Gooding, and they're trying to choose plots of land where they do everything for the veterans. So the veteran will obviously not only have a place to go to rehab injuries or mental issues, but they'll also have a place to go to repair their finances.
Wow, that's fantastic.
To recreate. Yeah,
that's great.
And it's in concept phase right now, but it is really an out of the box, I guess, repair kit for what veterans are dealing with in totality.
That's great.
And there's a few others I know of, definitely some smaller groups, but anything that starts with the veteran himself is hopefully going to branch out and be able to repair, issues with the family and some of the greater issues they suffer. So.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think you've done a fantastic job of bringing those to light, in the book. And, now I really want to know what happens now. And once I get into a series with a book too, I'm kind of a book nerd. It's just like, I got to know what happens now. So,
well, I plan on it being a trilogy. I mentioned his name before, Max Martini, who was in The Unit, the TV show The Unit. And then, of course, he was in Saving Private Ryan. And then in some good friends of mine in the movie 13 Hours. He was played my friend Mark Geist's character, who had his arm destroyed by a shrapnel from a mortar. He asked for a copy, so I've got my fingers crossed that something will come out of that. We'll see. Man. We'll see what goes there. But so like I said, I'm excited to get Relapse out, and then there will be a third book in that trilogy eventually. So
awesome. Yeah. So do you think you just? Because you got one book, you got another book already done. You're working on your third book. It sounds like you're just going to keep writing. Yeah,
it's easy for me to do. The hard part is talking over the mic or trying to promote the thing. That's difficult.
Sure.
It gets overwhelming for sure, but exciting. And I love writing about it. I love crafting a story, especially when you can do it from some of your own or somebody. A brother or a unit member's experiences. So
well, we're excited. We'll link to Failed State on our Facebook page as well, so you can get it. But it's pretty much everywhere you can get an ebook as well.
Yes, sir.
And then swing by the shop on March 16th. You can meet Andrew and get your own signed copy of the book as well. So Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time and spending some time with us. We'll see you on the 16th. Maybe have you on for a little second again.
Yeah, looking forward to it, guys.
And we appreciate it. If you have a question for Andrew, send us an email, podcast@iishooting.com, or check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/range-minded podcast. And any feedback or anything like that, or if you want to reach out and you want to look for a resource for veteran or veteran's family or a contractor or anything like that, we'd be happy to connect you with Andrew as well. So
awesome.
Thank you again, and thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Range Minded. Find us online at Range Minded Podcast on Facebook, or send us an email at podcast@iishooting.com. We're always happy to get feedback, episode suggestions, whatever you want to send us, really. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and pretty much wherever else you get your podcasts from. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.